My name is Maya, and for the better part of a year, the loudest sound in my life was the ringing of a single, unanswered question in my head. How does a home, a place built of love and memory, become nothing more than a line item on someone else's balance sheet? The silence in this old house is different now. It's a comfortable, settled quiet, the kind that comes after a fever breaks. It's the sound of permanence. But before this peace, there was a war, a quiet, undeclared war, fought not with weapons, but with whispers, with spreadsheets, and with the slow, grinding erosion of respect. This house, this magnificent Victorian that has been my sanctuary for 50 years, was in the eyes of my daughter-in-law, Amanda, nothing more than a problem to be solved. To her, it was a money pit, a relic, a teardown. Those were her words, spoken with the casual cruelty of someone swatting a fly. She saw its gabled roof and ornate gingerbread trim, not as character, but as decay. She looked at the hand-carved mahogany staircase, its newel post, worn smooth by the hands of generations, and saw only a fire hazard. The stained glass window on the landing, which casts a kaleidoscope of color across the hall every afternoon, was just an inefficient single-pane antique that was costing her a fortune in imaginary heating bills. My son David, her husband, was caught in the crossfire, a man I loved dearly, but who had long ago traded his spine for a quiet life. He would stand there, his face a mask of pain neutrality, while Amanda laid out her vision, a vision that involved bulldozers and concrete mixers. She wanted to raze my life to the ground and erect what she called a modern masterpiece in its place, one of those soulless glass boxes that look more like a corporate headquarters than a home. And of course, they would be doing me a favor. They would sell off most of an acre to a developer who was practically salivating at the prospect, and with the profits, they would build their dream home and a small, manageable granny flat for me in the back. A beige box for a beige-colored ending to my life. The inciting incident, the moment the Cold War turned hot, wasn't a single grand explosion. It was a death by 1,000 cuts that finally severed the nerve. It was a Tuesday. I remember the air was thick, with the promise of a summer thunderstorm. I was in the back garden, tending to the roses my late husband, Tom, had planted for me on our 10th anniversary. Their fragrance was my favorite thing in the world, a scent tied so deeply to my memory of his smile. That's when I heard the voices. They were coming from the front lawn, low and professional. I walked around the side of the house, my gardening gloves still on, and my heart seized. There on my lawn stood Amanda, pointing and gesturing with a sleek tablet in her hand. With her were two men in crisp new work shirts with Apex Demolition stitched over the pockets. My son David was there too, shuffling his feet on the grass, looking anywhere but at the house, anywhere but at me. I stood behind the massive old oak tree, hidden from view, and I listened. I know, eavesdropping is a terrible thing. But when your life is being discussed like a hostile takeover, you listen. Amanda's voice was sharp, clinical. She was talking about load-bearing walls and foundation integrity, not with any interest in preserving them, but in how efficiently they could be brought down. One of the demolition guys, a beefy man with a clipboard, grunted, "Yeah, the structure is solid. Lath and plaster, old-growth timber. It'll be a fight. We'd need the heavy equipment. It'll add to the cost." Amanda scoffed, a sound like tearing silk. "Whatever it takes." The developer's offer is contingent on the lot being cleared by the end of the quarter, and we need to factor in getting the current resident relocated. My breath caught in my throat. The current resident. She said it as if I were a stubborn tenant, a squatter, not the woman who raised the man standing right next to her. Then David, my David, finally spoke. His voice was so quiet I had to strain to hear it. Amanda, maybe we should talk to her about this first. She doesn't even know. Don't be ridiculous, David, she snapped, not even bothering to lower her voice. We've tried talking. All she does is get emotional about memories. You can't put memories in the bank. This is about our future. Lily's future. Once she's in a nice, clean apartment, with no stairs to worry about, she'll thank us. She just can't see the big picture. The other man from Apex chuckled. Yeah, my mom was the same with her place. They get attached. Sometimes you just have to make the decision for them. It's for their own good. For my own good. The words echoed in the humid air, colder than any winter wind. They had already decided. They were getting estimates. They were planning my relocation. My home of 50 years. The place where I had raised my son, nursed my husband through his final illness, and celebrated every major milestone of my life, was being auctioned off while I was pruning roses 30 feet away. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about me. I wasn't a mother. I was an obstacle. My life wasn't a life. It was an inconvenience. And in that moment, something inside me, something that had been soft and yielding for decades, hardened into a diamond. The betrayal wasn't just in her words. It was in my son's silence. His complicity was a wound far deeper than her greed. The storm clouds gathered overhead, and I felt a different kind of storm gathering within me. My resolve began to set. They had made a critical error. They thought I was as old and fragile as they wanted my house to be. They were about to find out how wrong they were. The sound of their car doors slamming shut was like a starter pistol firing in my soul. I sank down onto the cool, damp earth behind the oak tree, the rough bark pressing into my back. My hands were trembling, not with fear, but with a white-hot, crystalline rage. The demolition men were gone, and soon David and Amanda's car crunched over the gravel and disappeared down the lane. I was alone, utterly and completely alone, with the ghost of their conversation hanging in the air, for her own good. The condescension was a physical thing, a bitter taste in my mouth. She just can't see the big picture. Oh, I could see the picture, all right. I saw a future where I was neatly filed away in a sterile 2-room box, a footnote in the story of their grand new life, a life funded by the demolition of mine. I stumbled back into the house, the screen door sighing shut behind me. The familiar scent of lemon oil and old books filled my lungs, a scent that had always meant comfort, but now felt like an elegy. I ran my hand along the wallpaper in the hall, a pattern of climbing ivy that Tom and I had picked out together in the spring of 1974. I remembered us laughing as we tried to hang it, getting more paste on ourselves than on the walls. We were so young, so full of plans. This house was the biggest of them all. I found myself drifting into the sitting room, my feet moving on autopilot. My gaze fell upon the fireplace, above which hung a framed, hand-drawn sketch. It wasn't a photograph, but an architectural rendering of the house, signed in a flourishing, elegant script in the bottom right corner. Silas Croft, 1888. Tom had found it in a dusty antique shop in the city a year after we moved in. He'd paid $50 for it, a fortune to us back then, but he'd come home beaming, saying a house like this deserves to have its history on the wall. Tom had been obsessed with the house's bones, with its story. He was a history teacher, and to him everything had a past worth exploring. He'd spent weekends at the library, digging through microfiche and dusty town records, trying to piece together the life of this Silas Croft. What he'd found was fascinating. Croft wasn't a household name like Frank Lloyd Wright or Louis Sullivan, but in this small corner of the state, he was a legend among a very niche group of architectural historians. He was a contemporary of the greats, a man who had apparently studied in Europe before returning to his hometown, determined to blend Victorian grandeur with a more American rustic sensibility. He built less than a dozen homes before his life was cut tragically short by pneumonia at the age of 42. Each one was unique, a bespoke creation, and according to Tom's research, this house, our house, was believed to be his final, most personal work, built for his own family. This place isn't just wood and nails, Maya, Tom used to say, his voice full of passion, as he pointed out the unique quatrefoil cutouts in the gables or the subtle wave-like pattern in the porch railing. It's a work of art, an artist's last testament. Amanda had never understood that. To her, history was something you read about in books, not something you lived in. From the very beginning, her visits were punctuated by a running commentary of complaints disguised as helpful suggestions. "Oh Maya, these original windows are so drafty, you should really consider vinyl replacements. They're so much more efficient." Or "this kitchen is charming, but so impractical. A nice open concept plan would really brighten up the space." She'd say it with a bright plastic smile, as if she were offering me a cup of tea, but her eyes were always calculating, redesigning, erasing. I had tolerated it for years. For David, I told myself it was just her way. She was a modern woman, pragmatic and unsentimental. I was the opposite, to keep the peace, to ensure I had a place in my son's life, and in the life of my granddaughter, Lily. I smiled and nodded. I bit my tongue so hard I could taste blood. I remembered one year, about a decade ago, when the roof started leaking into the attic. The estimate for a proper slate repair was astronomical. That very same month, David and Amanda found the perfect house for themselves, but they were short on the down payment. David came to me, his face etched with anxiety. "Mom, I hate to ask." I didn't even let him finish. I took the money I had painstakingly saved for the new roof and gave it to them. I told myself that my son's security was more important than a few damp boxes in an attic. I patched the roof with tar myself, a temporary fix that became a 10-year solution. They got their house. I got a recurring water stain and a polite but distant thank you card. It wasn't about revenge back then. It was about love, or at least what I thought was love. What I see now is that it was a one-way street. I was the provider, the backstop, the ever-reliable source of support. They were the takers. It had become the natural order of our family. Now, standing in the dim light of the sitting room, the voices of the demolition men still echoing in my ears, I felt the foundation of that family order crack. The years of quiet sacrifices, the swallowed insults, the forced smiles, they all coalesced into a single unbearable weight. I sank into Tom's old leather armchair, the one that still held the faint scent of his pipe tobacco, and I finally let myself break. The tears weren't loud, hiccuping sobs, but a silent, hot stream that traced paths down my wrinkled cheeks. It was the weeping of a woman who had just realized she was a ghost in her own life. My low point wasn't a scream, it was a whisper. I whispered Tom's name into the empty room. "What do I do, Tom? What do I do?" The house was silent, offering no answers. For a horrifying hour, I considered their plan. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was just a sentimental old fool clinging to the past. Maybe a clean, modern apartment with no stairs and no leaky roof was the sensible choice. The thought was so bleak, so utterly devoid of joy, that it felt like a physical death, to be scrubbed clean of my own history. And that's when the catalyst arrived, not as a lightning bolt of inspiration, but as a gentle knock on the front door. I wiped my eyes and pulled myself together, moving to the door like an automaton. When I opened it, I saw Clara, my young neighbor from across the street. She was a graduate student in history, a bright, kind girl with an infectious passion for the past. She was holding a Tupperware container. "Mrs. Davison? Maya? I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, her brow furrowed with concern. "I saw those gentlemen from the demolition company earlier, and you looked so upset when you went inside. I baked some lemon bread and thought you might like some." Her simple, unadorned kindness was so starkly different from my own family's calculated cruelty that it shattered my composure all over again. I invited her in, and the whole story just spilled out of me. The whispers, the insults, Amanda's grand design, David's silence, the men from Apex Demolition. I told her everything, my voice cracking. She listened patiently, her eyes wide with a mixture of sympathy and indignation. She didn't offer platitudes or tell me it would all be okay. She just listened. When I was finished, I felt drained, empty. I ended with a sigh of defeat. I suppose they'll get their way. I'm just one old woman. What can I do? Clara was quiet for a moment, her gaze drifting over to the framed sketch of the house above the fireplace. She stood up and walked over to it, peering at the signature. "Silas Croft," she read aloud, her voice suddenly charged with a new energy. "I knew this house was special. I've been writing a paper on him. He's a bit of a local legend in the preservation community, terribly underrated." She turned back to me, her eyes shining with an idea. "Maya," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial, "you asked what you can do. What if you don't fight them on their terms? What if you change the battlefield entirely?" I looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" She pointed to the sketch. "They see a teardown. You need to make them see a landmark." A landmark. The word hung in the air, foreign and powerful. I had never considered it. To me, it was just my home. But through her eyes, for the first time, I saw it not as a collection of my memories, but as a piece of public history, a legacy that belonged not just to me, but to the town. Clara's excitement was contagious. "The city's historical society has a landmarking program," she said, talking faster now, pacing the oriental rug. "It's a long shot, and the paperwork is a nightmare, but if a building is deemed to have significant architectural or historical merit, it can be protected. Any major alterations, let alone demolition, become illegal." A spark ignited in the cold, dead ashes of my despair. Illegal. The word was a shield, a sword. It was a weapon they wouldn't see coming. Amanda was busy with demolition estimates. She was fighting a war of finance and real estate. This was a war of history, of culture, of legacy. It was a language she didn't even speak. A slow smile spread across my face, the first genuine smile in months. It felt strange on my lips. It probably looked a little terrifying. "A landmark," I repeated, the word tasting like victory. Clara smiled back. "A co-conspirator." The despair that had crippled me just an hour before began to transmute, hardening from grief into a cold, clear resolve. Amanda saw a money pit. I was about to prove that this house was a gold mine of a very different kind. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about preservation. It was about honoring Tom. But as I pictured the look on Amanda's face when she found out, I had to admit, a small, dark part of me whispered back, "Oh, but the revenge will be sweet." And for the first time, I didn't push that thought away. I welcomed it. The next morning, the world looked different. The sunlight slanting through the stained glass window didn't seem melancholy. It seemed defiant. The old house didn't creak and groan. It felt like it was settling in, girding its loins for a fight. My meeting with Clara had been more than a catalyst, it was a declaration of purpose. We were no longer just a grieving widow and a kind neighbor, we were a two-woman, historical preservation task force. Our first order of business was to build our case. Clara, with her academic rigor, was the perfect general for this campaign. We can't just walk into the historical society and say this is a nice old house, she explained, sitting at my heavy oak dining table, which was now covered in notebooks and mugs of tea. We need to build an airtight, undeniable dossier. We need primary sources, architectural analysis, historical context. We need to prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this house is not just important to you, but important to the city. And so began our secret project. While Amanda was on the phone with developers, dreaming of granite countertops and infinity pools, Clara and I were descending into the catacombs of history. Our first stop was my own attic, that leaky, forgotten space that I had neglected for a decade suddenly became the most important room in the house. Armed with flashlights and face masks to protect against the dust, we spent a whole weekend sifting through Tom's old boxes, and we struck gold, tucked away in a battered leather trunk, beneath my old wedding dress, and a stack of David's childhood report cards, was a collection of Tom's research. He had been far more thorough than I ever realized. There were photocopies of old newspaper articles from the 1890s announcing the construction of the Croft residence. There were hand-drawn maps of the original property lines, which showed the house was the centerpiece of a much larger estate. But the real treasure was a small cloth-bound journal. It was Silas Croft's own building ledger for the house. Clara's hands trembled as she opened it. The pages were filled with Croft's elegant, spidery handwriting. He detailed the source of every piece of timber, the name of the Italian artisan who crafted the stained glass, the specific chemical composition of the unique blue paint used for the exterior trim. It was a meticulous, loving record of creation, but the most powerful part was the last entry, dated just a few months before his death. He wrote, "I have put the best of myself into these walls. It is not a house, but a vessel for a life. May it stand for 100 years and more, a testament not to my name, but to the simple, sturdy beauty of a family's home." Clara looked up at me, her eyes shining. "Maya, this is it. This is our smoking gun." He literally calls it his masterpiece. This discovery fueled us. Our investigation expanded. We spent days at the city archives, a place that smelled of decaying paper and quiet dedication. Clara, as a university researcher, got us access to the special collections. We unrolled original, massive blueprints of the house, so brittle they threatened to turn to dust. They showed details Amanda would never see, hidden support structures of rare American chestnut, a clever passive ventilation system that was a century ahead of its time, intricate design notes in the margins. We were excavating the house's soul. During this time, I thought a lot about my son David. It was a necessary pain, like probing a wound to clean it. How had the bright, loving boy, who used to help his father polish the mahogany staircase, become the silent, shuffling man on the lawn? I realized it hadn't happened overnight. It was the result of a slow, insidious campaign by Amanda. She had isolated him, subtly at first, then more overtly. She had framed his loyalty to me as a weakness, his love for his childhood home as a childish sentimentality. She was the architect of his reality now, and in her reality, I was the eccentric old mother-in-law standing in the way of their financial liberation. He was the golden child of their two-person kingdom, and his only job was to please his queen. His passivity wasn't just weakness, it was a survival tactic in the life he had chosen. This realization didn't excuse him, but it clarified things. It made my path forward feel less like a betrayal and more like a necessary course correction. Our alliance grew beyond just the two of us. Clara suggested we meet with a man named Mr. Abernathy at the City Historical Society. He was a legend in the local preservation scene, a man known for his bow ties, his encyclopedic knowledge of 19th century architecture, and his ferocious defense of the city's heritage. He was our gatekeeper. Our meeting with him was terrifying. His office was a cramped, book-lined cave in the basement of City Hall. He peered at us over a pair of half-moon glasses, his expression one of profound skepticism. "Another charming old house," he said, his voice dry as old parchment. "Madam, I receive dozens of such applications a year. The city's budget for sentimentality is, shall we say, limited." This was our moment. Clara, bless her heart, took the lead. She didn't gush or plead. She laid out our case with the precision of a surgeon. She presented the blueprints, the newspaper clippings, and finally, with a flourish, Silas Croft's journal. She opened it to the final page and slid it across the desk. Mr. Abernathy picked it up. He read the entry, his bushy white eyebrows slowly rising. He read it again. He then took a magnifying glass from a drawer and examined the signature, comparing it to another document he pulled from a file. A long, profound silence filled the room. I held my breath. Finally, he looked up, and for the first time, there was a fire in his eyes. "American chestnut," he murmured, almost to himself. "I thought it was all gone after the blight. And this ventilation system, it's ingenious." He looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time. "Mrs. Davison," he said, his voice now ringing with a new respect, "you are not living in a house. You are living in the Silas Croft house. Why has this not been on our radar for 50 years? I simply smiled. "It's been busy being a home, Mr. Abernathy." He let out a short, barking laugh. "Well, it's time for it to do double duty." He explained the process. It was indeed a bureaucratic labyrinth. There would be forms, public notices, a review by the architectural committee, and a final hearing before the city council. "Your daughter-in-law and her developer friends will almost certainly fight this," he warned. "They will argue economic hardship, property rights, progress. They will have lawyers. You need to be prepared." I looked at the stack of evidence on his desk, at Clara's determined face, and I felt a strength I hadn't known I possessed. "Let them bring their lawyers, Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice steady. "I'll bring Silas Croft." This was the part of the plan that required the most patience, the most faith in the slow, grinding wheels of bureaucracy. It was a silent, invisible war. While Amanda and David were busy getting soil analysis reports and drafting floor plans for their glass monstrosity, Clara and I were deep in the trenches of paperwork. We filled out the official landmark designation application, a document so thick it could have stopped a door. Every detail had to be cross-referenced, every claim backed up with a citation from our dossier. Mr. Abernathy guided us, his gruff demeanor belying a fierce passion for the cause. He became our unwitting and most powerful ally. The first move in our silent takeover was deceptively small. According to city ordinance, a public notice of the pending historical review had to be posted on the property. It was a simple letter-sized sign, laminated and attached to a thin metal stake. Mr. Abernathy's assistant hammered it into the corner of my front lawn, near the sidewalk, half hidden by one of the rose bushes Tom had planted. It was official, it was legal, and it was almost entirely unnoticeable, unless you were looking for it. Amanda and David, of course, were not looking. They were looking at architectural renderings on their iPads, their eyes fixed on a future that no longer existed. They drove past that little sign at least a dozen times over the next few weeks, completely oblivious. Their arrogance was our greatest asset. They were so convinced of their own victory, so certain that my emotional attachment was the only hurdle, that they never even bothered to look at the ground beneath their feet. The silence from their end was unnerving. I knew they were meeting with their chosen developer, a slick operator named Rex Bishop. I could only imagine the conversations, the promises being made, the champagne they were probably pre-chilling. Every day that passed, my anxiety grew. Was our application moving fast enough? Would they somehow get a demolition permit issued before the historical review put a stay on all activity? Mr. Abernathy assured me the system would work. The moment our application was officially filed and logged, Mrs. Davison, he had said, a flag goes up in the city's permitting system. Any application for demolition on this address will be automatically frozen pending our review. They are operating in a fantasy world. The first sign that their fantasy was about to collide with reality came not as a shout but as a phone call. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counters when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Yes, is this the owner of 121 Chestnut Avenue? A man's voice asked, brisk and impatient. Speaking, I replied. This is Rex Bishop, he said, the developer. My stomach did a little flip. Listen, I just got off the phone with my guy at the city planning department. He says there's some kind of historical hold on your property. We have a signed letter of intent. My investors are lined up, and now there's this bureaucratic nonsense. What's going on? Amanda assured me you were on board. I summoned every ounce of theatrical innocence I possessed. A historical hold, I asked, my voice a perfect blend of confusion and mild concern. Oh my, that's very strange. I haven't heard a thing about it. Must be some new citywide initiative or something. You know how they are. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head. A city initiative, he repeated, his voice laced with suspicion. Right, well, could you do me a favor and call the city and tell them you're not interested, that you waive any review? We need to get this cleared up ASAP. Oh, I wouldn't feel comfortable interfering with official city business. Mr. Bishop, I said sweetly, I'm sure it's just a formality. I'm certain it will all be sorted out. I hung up the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. I allowed myself a small, triumphant smile. The first shot had been fired, and they didn't even know where it came from. An hour later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Amanda. Her voice was an octave higher than usual, stretched thin with panic. Maya, what did you do? Amanda, what a lovely surprise, I said, my voice calm as a summer pond. To what do I owe the pleasure? Don't play dumb with me, she shrieked. Rex Bishop just called, ranting about some historical designation. He said the whole project is on hold. This was supposed to be a sure thing. We've already paid the architect a retainer. Here it was, the moment I had both dreaded and craved. I chose my words carefully. Amanda, I have no idea what you're talking about. A historical designation for my old house? That seems highly unlikely. I let a small self-deprecating laugh escape. Who would want to preserve this old money pit? Using her own words against her was a particular satisfaction. It threw her completely off balance. I heard her sputtering on the other end, a torrent of accusations and frustrated questions. She was so used to being in control, to having everyone bend to her will, that the sudden appearance of an obstacle she couldn't understand and couldn't bully was making her unravel. Finally, David got on the phone. His voice was laced with that familiar, pleading tone, the one he always used when he was trying to clean up one of Amanda's messes. "Mom," he began. "Mom, please, what's going on?" She's very upset. Rex is threatening to pull out. There's a lot of money on the line. If you started some kind of application, can't you just withdraw it? For me? For the family? For the family? There it was. The guilt, the manipulation, dressed up as a loving request. The old me, the Maya of just a few months ago, would have buckled. The old me would have apologized and promised to fix it, just to hear the relief in her son's voice. But the old me was gone, buried under an avalanche of disrespect. "David," I said, and my voice was no longer the soft, accommodating tone he was used to. It was quiet, but it was made of steel. "There is nothing for me to withdraw. The city of Oakwood is conducting a review based on its own criteria. It is entirely out of my hands." It was a lie, of course, but it was a lie that was technically true. I had started the process, but the city was now running it. "Perhaps," I added, unable to resist twisting the knife just a little, "Amanda shouldn't have been so quick to spend money she didn't have." I hung up before he could respond. I stood in the silent kitchen, my hands still on the phone, and I felt the tectonic plates of my family shifting beneath my feet. For 50 years the power had flowed in one direction, from me to them. That flow had just been reversed. They were panicked, they were losing control, and I was just getting started. The fallout from my phone call with David and Amanda was swift and brutal. Amanda, realizing she couldn't bully or charm the city's bureaucracy, resorted to the only weapon she had left: emotional blackmail. Her next move was designed to inflict maximum pain, to isolate me and force me to capitulate. She weaponized my granddaughter. A few days later, my phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. It was from Lily, my 12-year-old granddaughter, sent from her mother's phone. The text read, "Grandma, Mom says I can't come over anymore. She says your house is unsafe and you're being selfish. I miss you." I stared at the words until they blurred. Of all the cruelties, this one cut the deepest. Lily was the one pure, uncomplicated joy in my life. She loved this old house. She called the stained glass window her magic rainbow maker. She had a favorite hiding spot in the dusty space under the stairs and believed with all her heart that the ghost of a friendly sea captain lived in the attic. She and I had a bond that existed outside of Amanda's sphere of influence, and Amanda knew it. Forbidding Lily from seeing me wasn't about safety. It was a calculated act of war, a desperate countermove from a queen who was losing her kingdom. This was Amanda's logic, a twisted, but in her mind, perfectly plausible strategy. If Maya loves Lily more than the house, and I take Lily away, Maya will give up the house to get Lily back. For a few agonizing hours, her strategy almost worked. The thought of not seeing Lily, of her growing up hearing how selfish her grandmother was a physical ache in my chest. I sat in Tom's armchair, the silence of the house suddenly feeling vast and hostile, and I almost picked up the phone to surrender. But then I looked at Silas Croft's words, framed above the mantel, "A vessel for a life," and I thought about the life I wanted to model for Lily. Was it a life of capitulation, of allowing yourself to be bullied into submission? Or was it a life of standing up for what you believe in, of protecting your legacy, of having dignity? Amanda was teaching Lily that love was conditional, that relationships were transactional. I had to teach her something else. I had to teach her that love also means having a backbone. So I didn't call Amanda. Instead, I wrote Lily a letter, an old-fashioned, handwritten letter on my best stationery. I didn't mention Amanda, or the fight. I told her stories about the house, about the friendly sea captain in the attic, and about her grandfather, Tom. I told her that sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, but that my love for her was bigger than any house and stronger than any argument. I told her I would be waiting for her, always. I put a pressed rose from the garden inside the envelope and mailed it to her school, hoping it would get to her without being intercepted. The family exodus, as it turned out, was not my own. It was a slow fracturing of the unit David and Amanda had built on a foundation of greed. David, torn between his wife's relentless ambition and his mother's sudden, immovable strength, began to fray at the edges. I got a few hang-up calls that I knew were from him. I could picture him, sitting in his car, wanting to say something, an apology, a plea, a word of support, but being unable to form the words. The pressure from the developer, Rex Bishop, was also mounting on them. He had investors to answer to. The delay was costing him money and credibility. His calls to Amanda, I later learned from a sympathetic cousin, went from professional to demanding to outright abusive. The dream they had sold him was turning into a nightmare, and he was holding them responsible. The final hearing with the city council was scheduled for a Thursday evening. This was it, the culmination of months of work. Clara and I sat in the front row of the public gallery. Mr. Abernethy was at the podium, presenting our case with the gravitas of a prosecuting attorney. He had blown up photographs of the unique architectural details, quotes from historical texts, and of course, the story of Silas Croft. Then it was the opposition's turn. Rex Bishop's lawyer, a slick man with a shark-like smile, stood up. He spoke of progress, of economic development, of property rights. He painted me as an eccentric old woman holding up a multi-million-dollar project out of pure sentimentality. And then for his final witness, he called Amanda to the stand. My heart pounded. Amanda walked to the podium, dressed in a severe-looking power suit. She was the picture of a concerned, reasonable daughter-in-law. She spoke about her deep affection for me, her worries about my safety in such an old, deteriorating house. She talked about the financial burden of the upkeep, the drafts, the faulty wiring, a litany of exaggerated and outright fabricated problems. She was good. She was very, very good. She painted a picture of a loving family trying to do what was best for their elderly mother, only to be met with irrational resistance. But she made one mistake, one fatal error born of her own arrogance. One of the council members, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Peters, leaned into her microphone. "Mrs. Davison," she said to Amanda, "you've spoken at length about the house's supposed state of disrepair. But your primary plan, as I understand it, from Mr. Bishop's proposal, was never to repair it. It was to demolish it. Is that correct?" Amanda's smile faltered for just a second. "Well, yes, the land is the primary asset. The structure itself is unfortunately a teardown." There it was. She'd said it. In a public forum, on the official record, the word hung in the air, ugly and final. Mrs. Peters nodded slowly. "A teardown. Thank you, that's very clear." The council voted. It was unanimous, 7-0, the motion to grant official, protected landmark status to the Silas Croft House at 121 Chestnut Avenue was passed. A smattering of applause broke out from the preservationists and history buffs in the audience. Clara grabbed my hand and squeezed it, her face beaming. I felt a wave of relief, so profound, it almost buckled my knees. I turned to look at Amanda. She was standing frozen at the podium, her face pale, her mouth slightly agape. Her perfectly constructed narrative had been shattered by a single honest word from her own lips. She looked over at me, and in her eyes I saw not just defeat, but pure, unadulterated hatred. The power had shifted, completely and irrevocably. The teardown was now a permanent fixture, a protected piece of city history, and her dream of a modern monstrosity was officially dead. The city council chamber emptied out, a low buzz of conversation filling the grand, wood-paneled room. Clara was accepting congratulations from Mr. Abernathy and a few other members of the Historical Society. I just sat there for a moment, letting the reality of it wash over me. The war was over. I had won. But victory didn't feel like a jubilant celebration. It felt quiet. It felt like a deep, steadying breath after holding it for far too long. I saw David and Amanda across the room. Near the exit, Rex Bishop and his lawyer were gone, having vanished the moment the vote was cast. It was just the two of them. Amanda was speaking to David in a low, furious hiss, stabbing her finger at his chest. He wasn't even looking at her. He was looking at me. His face was a wreck of conflicting emotions, shame, anger, and something else, something that looked like reluctant admiration. I knew the final confrontation was inevitable. It couldn't end here, in a public hall. It had to end at home. My home. I drove back to the house, the familiar streets looking brighter, sharper. When I pulled into the driveway, their car was already there, parked haphazardly, halfway on the lawn. They were waiting for me on the porch. I walked up the stone path, my keys in my hand. Amanda stood with her arms crossed, her body rigid with fury. David stood a few feet behind her, his hands jammed in his pockets, looking like a teenager about to be grounded. "Congratulations, Maya." Amanda spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You got what you wanted. You and your little historical society friends. You've ruined everything." I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and looked up at her. I was no longer afraid of her. I was no longer intimidated by her anger. "I didn't ruin anything, Amanda," I said, my voice even. "I saved something. Something you were never capable of understanding." "Understanding?" She laughed. A harsh, ugly sound. "Oh, I understand perfectly. This was never about history. This was about punishing us. This was about you being selfish and refusing to let go. This house is a prison, and you've just locked yourself inside it forever. A rotting, worthless prison." "It's not worthless to me," I replied calmly. "And as of tonight, it's not worthless to the city either. It has a value you can't measure in dollars and cents. We had plans," she screamed, her composure finally shattering completely. "We had a future. We were going to build a beautiful life here, and you with your dusty relics and your sentimental nonsense. You destroyed it. David, say something. Tell her." David finally looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and for the first time in a very long time, I saw a flicker of the boy I used to know. "She's right, Amanda," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Amanda whirled around to face him. "What did you say?" "She's right," he said again, a little louder this time. "It's her home. We didn't have the right. I never should have let it get this far." Amanda stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. The betrayal in her eyes was absolute. She had lost her house, her money, and now she was losing her ally. Her control was gone. I took out the dossier that Clara and I had prepared. I had brought it home from the hearing. I walked up the steps and placed it on the small wicker table between the chairs. "I knew, Amanda," I said quietly. "I knew about Apex demolition. I heard you on the lawn that day. I heard you talking about relocating the current resident. I heard everything." Her face went white. All the fight, all the righteous anger, drained out of her, leaving behind a hollow, defeated shell. She had thought she was playing chess while I was playing checkers. She had no idea I was playing an entirely different game, on a board she couldn't even see. The house is a protected landmark now, I stated, not as a threat, but as a simple, unchangeable fact. Any significant alteration is illegal. The teardown, as you called it, is now a permanent fixture, and your dream of building a modern monstrosity in its place is officially history. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside. I turned back to look at them one last time. Amanda was staring at me, her expression unreadable. David couldn't meet my gaze. I think it's time for you to go home, I said, and then I closed the door, the solid, reassuring click of the lock sealing the new reality into place. It's been 6 months since that night. The silence in this old house is no longer the silence of loneliness, but the silence of peace. Last month, the city installed a small, tasteful bronze plaque next to the front door. It reads, "The Silas Croft House, 1888, a significant example of regional Victorian architecture, City of Oakwood Historic Landmark." Sometimes on weekends, a small group from the local historical walking tour will stop on the sidewalk, and the guide will point to the plaque and talk about Silas Croft's vision. I see them from the window, and I smile. The house is no longer just my secret, it's a shared piece of our town's story. Clara got a distinction on her thesis, which was all about Silas Croft and the preservation of his final masterpiece. She's been hired by the city's preservation committee, working alongside Mr. Abernathy. She still comes over for tea every week. We don't talk about Amanda or David much anymore. We talk about history, about architecture, about the future. My relationship with David is complicated. He has called a few times. The conversations are stilted, full of unspoken apologies. He and Amanda are still together, but from what I hear, their dream life has hit a significant snag. Without the promise of my property to leverage, their grand ambitions have crumbled into a pile of debt and recriminations. It wasn't my intention to destroy their marriage, but their marriage was built on a foundation of my erasure. When I refused to be erased, the whole structure fell apart. That, I believe, is a natural consequence, not an act of revenge. Though if I'm being honest, it's a consequence I don't lose any sleep over. And Lily, a few weeks after the hearing, I received another letter, this one on notebook paper, covered in doodles. It was from her. "Dear Grandma," it said, "I got your letter. Mom was really mad, but Dad said I could write back. I miss you and the sea captain. Can I come visit the landmark? She comes over every Saturday now." David drops her off. He and I exchange a few polite words at the door, but he never comes in. Lily and I spend our afternoons baking cookies in the impractical kitchen, or she'll sit on the landing and watch the magic rainbow maker paint colors on the wall. I'm telling her all the stories of the house, of her grandfather, of Silas Croft. I am passing the legacy on to her, not as a piece of real estate, but as a part of who she is. Looking back, the whole affair seems both surreal and inevitable. They saw a teardown, but I saw a lifetime. They saw land value, but I saw a legacy. They saw an old woman who was in the way, and they failed to see a person with a history, a will, and a deep, abiding love for the life she had built. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. It had to be. It was the only language they understood.